Hi, so first lesson. Lesson one is just to get everybody started on threading a needle for hand sewing and the different ways that we do that. So I've just grabbed a spool of thread that I have here at home and I picked out a needle. For your packs of needles that you have purchased, what you want to use is kind of the medium-sized needle that was in that pack. For what we need to do for our hand sewing samples, that will work just fine. I tell people that hand needles are sort of like different sizes for different purposes. For example, sometimes people understand nails, like if you're using nails to fix your house. Like a roofing nail isn't something that you would use to put up trim. Will it work? Sure, it'll work. It'll also kind of make a mess. It'll make it harder. Um, Needles are different sizes for different reasons, and the bigger needles are going to be tempting for you if you have just started hand sewing. You're going to automatically think that you want a bigger needle because it's easier to grab a hold of and it's easier to thread. You don't want to do that. It's actually going to make it harder for you to get your work done. So go with the one that's sort of the medium size in your package, and you will slowly start to figure out what size hand needles are going to work best for you. So I've got that. Like I said, I just have some thread that I'm going to use. Now, what we're using for hand sewing samplers is you want to use a color thread that doesn't match the fabric that you're sewing on. Normally, if you were doing a piece of clothing, that you would want to match the thread to the fabric, right? But since we're doing this for class to teach hand sewing stitches, you want a contrasting fabric so you can really see what your stitches are doing. You want to take a piece of thread about 2 feet long. I kind of use sometimes like the length of my arm. You don't want to use a really long piece of thread. And there are a couple of different ways that you can thread your needle. One is to do a double thread and one is a single thread. And what we're going to start doing is a single thread. Probably not the way that you're used to doing hand sewing if you've done it before. What you want to do for that is, like I said, cut yourself a piece of thread about 2 foot long. Don't go longer. You will regret it. A lot of times you think, yes, if I cut my thread longer, I won't run out of thread as fast. It will end up making knots and you will end up having lots of problems with it if it's too long. You don't do that. So you want to thread the needle. As you're threading it, I'm having trouble doing this, of course, with the camera. What you want to do is thread it through the eye. Now, if you're having trouble getting it threaded, it's just like the sewing machines where the thread can get fuzzy. And if the thread is fuzzy, what will happen is it'll make it very hard for you to thread because it won't want to go through the eye as readily. Once you get it through, okay, once you get it through, it's just there, okay? Just there hanging out on the thread. Leave it like that. Take one end of your thread and you're going to want to put a knot in the end of the thread. You want to put the knot in the end. The needle is still just hanging out here, okay? There are a couple different ways that you can make a knot. The way that I like to teach for most people is what I call a balloon knot. If you know how to tie a birthday party balloon, it's the same thing. Wrap it around maybe a couple times and you put that thread through and you make a knot. That'll make a knot for you, okay? Like I said, let me cut this off, show you again. It's the same idea as if you were tying a balloon knot. You wrap it around and you take the other thread through. There are other ways to do this. Now, I don't care how you make your knots. The purpose of the knot is to stop the thread from pulling through. As long as that works, I don't care how you make it. I would suggest actually, if this way isn't working for you and if you can't figure this out, do just go online and look up tutorials for making knots and thread. There are probably 7 or 8 different ways to make a knot in your thread for sewing. What you do need to remember is that this knot has to stop the thread. And like what I've done here is a single knot. It's possible that when I go to do this, I'm going to put a second knot on top of the first one, because depending on how big my needle is, the needle makes a hole in the fabric. If the knot isn't bigger than that hole, the thread's just going to pull through. So sometimes you have to put a second knot on top of it to stop it. Sometimes you have to do a different kind of knot to make sure that it's going to be enough to stop the fabric, or to stop that thread from coming through. So you want that knot to be fairly substantial. Like I said, there's a couple different ways. There is one way where you wrap the thread around the needle and pull it out. There's another way that you basically just roll it off of your finger and kind of make a knot that way. The balloon knot, I find, is the easiest for most students to learn who haven't sewn before. So what you have is this piece of thread with the needle hanging out here and a knot on one end, and we're going to fold it so that we're hanging onto the needle. And you'll see there's the second thread, and then at some point it's going to run out. You use single thread for sewing when you're wanting to do something that looks nice, when you're wanting to do fine work. When we later get to sewing on snaps and hooks and eyes and things like that, we're going to use the double thread because it's stronger and it's more important for it to stay functional. This single thread is for pretty. The double thread is more for strength. So this is how you set it up. And every time we do a sample, this is how your thread gets set up for doing the single. All right. What you'll want to do for our sewing samples is either get the muslin squares from the costume shop, or just use, if you have fabric at home, about a 6 by 6 inch square of woven cotton, which is like a sheets or fabric like that, not stretchy fabric that's like sheets or other stuff that isn't stretchy. You can use those if you want, or just grab muslin out of the shop. So this is your first step, is to have this needle threaded. And this needle can still move around. See, there's nothing keeping it there other than my hand right now. And then there's a knot in the end. This is where we want to be at before we start working on our samplers.